Welcome back, my friends, to the D-Rate the Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk of WilksWorld.com, and I am so incredibly grateful that you are taking the time to join me for another powerful DTH episode. Friends, at the D-Rate the Hate podcast, it's all about bettering the world one attitude at a time. See, we did not create the hate, but with your help, we can derate the hate. That all starts with gratitude and personal accountability. We cannot control everything that happens to us in life, but we can control how we react to it. How we act, how we react, no matter what happens to us, how we react to it makes the difference. Friends, there is only one good thing about a bad attitude, and that is that we have the ability as individuals to change it. Here on the DTH podcast, we strive to bring you great guests and provide tools to do just that. Please be sure to share it with your friends. Subscribe if you haven't done so. Ratings and feedback are always greatly appreciated. And with that, let's get to this week's episode. You know, friends, it is interesting. One of the most contentious issues of our time is this, LGBTQ letter movement thing. And we are made to believe that if we are not on board with all of these letters, that we are somehow evil, somehow bad people. And I think a lot of people don't realize that this, I guess, movement, if that's what you want to call it, movement, is not one cohesive unit. And there are very different issues within the issue. Now, my conversation for this week was actually prompted by an article written in a Substack by my new friend, Eva Kurilova. And that article was called Obey Us or the Conservatives Will Come For You. While this article is the one that really stood out to me, I've had an opportunity to read a lot of what Eva's written since I became familiar with her. And she's just a lot of fun and has an incredible way of talking about things. She definitely brings an insight and perspective to the conversation that I obviously could never have, right? But on Eva's Twitter, she is self-proclaimed Canada's preeminent lesbian, and again, she's a writer. She writes for her own Substack. She writes for the Distant Substack. And, looking over this article, one of the things, the title, obviously, me being a conservative guy, and I know how we often get people are more and more these days trying to divide us, not only using the word conservative as a pejorative, but making us out to be these big nasty boogeymen in so many ways. But one of the things that Eva wrote in here that really stood out to me was, trans activists have done more damage to my rights than conservatives could have ever dreamed. And that really stood out to me, so I wanted to have this conversation. Such a great conversation. You're not going to want to miss it. Friends, Eva Kurilova, such a great guest, such a great friend. And with that, here we go. Eva Kurilova, thank you for joining me on the D-Rate the Hate podcast. I certainly appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me on today.
Yes, so I saw your article a while back, Eva, that said, and it caught my eye. It stood out, like this big neon sign to me, because people, who know me know that I'm conservative, and I'm also, big into the depolarization thing, and just hate topics in general. So when I saw your article, Obey Us or the Conservatives Will Come For You. Again, it stood out. It slapped me like this big neon palm just smacked me right in the face. So
that's great to hear. I like when my titles are catchy.
Yeah, no, it's great. So, Eva, tell the DTH listeners, first of all, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell the DTH listeners who you are and what it is that you try to do with the writings that you do. I've been following you on Twitter. I've been fascinated by many things that you've written, but just take a second to introduce yourself, Eva.
Sure. Thank you. So my name is Eva Kurilova. I'm a writer, and I guess you could say sort of an activist, though I find that hard to apply to myself, from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I do a lot of writings mostly in the on the topics of gender ideology. So that's kind of like the big conglomeration of ideas that I guess I would sum up as either that sex isn't real or biological sex, male and female, that it isn't real or somehow isn't significant. So most of my writing sort of focuses on that. I write for a Substack called The Distance. But I also have my own Substack where I do talk about that, but I sort of branch out into more into broader topics, sort of broader cultural topics. Like the piece I wrote, Obey Us or the Conservatives Will Come for You, that does touch on gender ideology, but it also touches on issues of polarization, issues of accusations of hate, victimhood mindsets. That's something I'm interested in as well. So I think I do a lot of the same kind of stuff you do. It's not my main focus, but talking about polarization, which is becoming a bigger issue in Canada as well. I think we sort of imported that. It used to be, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, 15 years ago, elections weren't such a big deal. The nobody really people cared, of course, but it wasn't such a big deal. And nowadays it's everything is very polarized. Accusations of hate are just flying all over the place.
Right?
Yeah, so it is something that I've been talking about a bit more, as well as I've sort of, because in the past few years as I've been tackling gender ideology, I've also had like a huge political I don't know how to say, awakening, or just a change, a shift in my thinking about all of this. So that's sort of the kind of things I write about.
Nice, nice. And it's funny you bring that up, Eva, because in the past 10 to 15 years, like you said, things have become so much more political, whether it be Canada or the United States. And, obviously the two of our two countries that we're very closely aligned on many things. But in the past 10 to 15 years, and this is something I've often talked about, is people have now taken their political identity or their political beliefs and made it part of their core identity.
Yeah.
And then the same way now with gender ideology, right?
Mm-hmm.
People,
Mm-hmm.
I've known obviously gay, bisexual people for a couple decades, and it was never this thing that you being gay had to be part of your central identity,
Mm-hmm.
or you being lesbian had to be part of your central identity. You being conservative or you being liberal had to be central to your core identity. And now over the past 10, 15 years, it has become this thing. And then every time it comes up in conversation, now all of a sudden am I being attacked, or should I attack back, or do I need to get on this proactive stance and just start digging,
Yeah.
so that's why, when I started reading the stuff that you've been putting out, it really grabbed me, and I was really interested in that. And I thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Of
So
course.
let's get
Thank you.
into this thing, this obey us or the conservatives will come for you, because it's something that I see a lot. Obviously, being a conservative guy, it's something that I see a lot in this internet ecosystem, this toxic internet ecosystem that we have.
Yeah.
People use conservative as a pejorative, and they automatically, well, just like so many things, Eva,
Yeah.
just like so many things, is they put you in this bucket right away, right? And then make all these assumptions about you.
Yeah.
And I'm sure being a gal who does what you do, identifies the way that you do, you're used to being put in those buckets, right?
Oh, yes, I really am. Like you were saying, how the political is so personal now, and even sexual orientation is political. Like the reason that I wrote this piece is because I was so tired and frustrated of, I would put out a tweet or something, as you've seen, and I would get replies to the effect of, yeah, a tweet criticizing gender ideology, some aspect of it. Let's say men and women's sports, let's say the transitioning of children, or things like that. I criticize that a lot. And a common reply that I get is people saying, well, if the conservatives are fighting gender ideology now, which they are, that's the side that is. And if you help them, then they're going to come for you next. Basically, that's like the threat. So come for me in terms of, I don't know, take away my rights or attack me, or, that's just a really common accusation. And it's an attempt from these people to just manipulate me into being on their side by holding up conservatives as this really hateful boogeyman that right now you're distracted by this trans stuff, but once that's over, once you win, you're going to come after me. So that's
Right.
kind of how it's
Right.
phrased to me. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's it's so it's weird and I think of it as this double-edged sword, just playing devil advocate, because conservatives have always been the group that says, I didn't speak up when they came for this person, or I didn't speak up for they came for that person. Now everybody else is gone and they're coming for me. So that's always been like a tenet of conservatism.
Yeah.
So devil's advocate, I do kind of agree with what they're saying in principle, but it's not the same thing. And that's one of the things that I really like that you bring up, because it's something that I've said, but me being a, straight white male Christian, I can't speak to these things with any kind of I can't speak to these things with any kind of I don't have a dog in the fight, so
Right.
they people like sit down, shut up, get back in your
Oh, I know. I bet you
you
anything
don't
you
even get to
say, they're
talk
just like,
about it,
yeah,
you know. But I'm
yeah,
like, but that's not right, because I mean, I've had conversations for decades with people that have talked about this and done this, and I've got and obviously people say, well, I've got that friend, right? I've got the gay friend, or I've got the
I've
lesbian
got
friend,
trans friends.
I've got trans friends, right? But so I don't like to go that angle, but I mean, literally, I've had conversations with hundreds of thousands of people over the years, and it's one of the things that when the whole trans movement started moving in on the lesbian, gay, bisexual movement. I mean, the lesbian, gay, bisexual movement, obviously, nobody can deny the fact that that as a group, that this crowd fought for a very long time to have have their say, have their way, and
Yeah.
and do their thing. But then they started adding letters, because why? I mean, this is one thing that has bugged me about the whole thing, because and I've said it before. I've got an episode out called "If My Kid Identified as a Train." I it's one of these things where I have made it very, very clear over my time being public, and before I had any kind of public venue. I've made it very clear that I don't agree with a lot of the whole. I don't agree with most of the gender ideology stuff, and I don't pretend to be able to relate to gay and bisexual and trans, or and gay, bisexual, lesbian people like other people do. I make no bones about that. I don't hate anybody. I don't I don't wish any ill will on anybody, but it's not something I understand. It's not something I felt I ever really needed to.
Yeah.
But again, when they started having to add letters and they started like piggybacking onto that thing, I did start to see the kickback, or the pushback
Yeah.
from people in the lesbian, gay, bisexual crowd. So talk a little bit about that, because something that I've seen plenty of people talk about, but get so much pushback for, and you're standing up with bravery and really going at it with a position of authority, and I appreciate it. So talk a little bit
Thank,
about that for me.
well, thank you very much. I hear that from people a lot, that they appreciate that I'm speaking up, because, like you, they're like a straight white Christian man and nobody wants to hear them, which I feel is unfortunate. I think anybody can talk about whatever they want to talk about. But, in terms of how, like, this is something I write about a lot as well. The history of how all this stuff started. Like, today I released a piece about the history of this stuff. So unfortunately, I think what's sort of happened is I think it's fairly accurate to say that the gay movement, like the gay rights movement, speaking about just basic rights, got pretty hijacked over the last couple of decades. I mean, the kernel was there from the beginning. I think that, it got hijacked by political and ideological, postmodernists, queer theorists. I think a lot of that was there from the beginning. I think a lot of early gay rights activists were, on the left politically. But somewhere along the way, even in the 70s, like, let me backtrack a little bit. People claim that the whole movement started as one big happy family. There's LGBT, there's this myth that trans women of color started Stonewall, which is just not true at all. It's a complete myth. That didn't happen. Initially, there was sort of the movement for same-sex attracted people to give them rights. And then there was also, at the same time, there was these organizations for transvestites kind of building, straight heterosexual men who had this fetish for cross-dressing. I've also written a piece kind of highlighting this history. And in certain cases, people who wanted sex changes, that was actually legal well before there was any kind of talk of same-sex marriage or civil unions or anything like that. But then the gay rights movement really took off, early 2000s. Canada had gay marriage in 2005. It became a very popular thing. It became, a lot of people supported it. They saw the merit in it. And at a certain point, I think, especially after America legalized same-sex marriage, you had this big activist machinery that had nowhere else didn't have anything to do. It was like, oh, we've achieved this pinnacle of what we were fighting for. Like, what do we do now?
Right.
And so
Right.
I
What's
think,
next?
yeah, I think that was a big deal because in Canada, let's say, like I said, we had same-sex marriage since 2005. And it's not like our country immediately jumped into the gender stuff. There was kind of a lull there, right? And I think, but after America legalized it and you had the human rights organization, there was a really big organization that then just pivoted completely to gender, completely to trans. And I think that's when things kind of went off the rails with the gender stuff. That's when Canada started looking into it too. So, yeah, I hope that's, I know, a little confusing, but in terms of what happened, I think that there was a significant hijacking of our movement. But that's not to say that most, gay, lesbian, bisexual people, unfortunately, I think most have fallen for it because most fall for that line that say, if you don't support this next progressive thing, then you're a conservative or like you're going to give this to the conservatives. So unfortunately, there are gay and lesbian people that are speaking out against this. I'm certainly not the only one. There's wonderful people who are, but it's almost become a political identity. It's been tied up in that. So if you're like a leftist gay and lesbian person, which a lot of us are, you just kind of feel like you have to go along with this new trans thing because to not go along with it, you're sacrificing your political identity. And nowadays, unfortunately, the LGBT label, that's LGBTQ now and all these other letters, that's far more of a political signifier than even like your sexuality,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing for me, Eva, and I always said, and many of the other conservative people in the conservative circles that I've run in have said, and when it came to the whole gay marriage thing or that whole movement and the skepticism that was coming along with that movement, from people on my side of the political spectrum was, I got no problem with this in theory, but the distinction between a man and a woman is a very real thing. And a man is a man, a woman is a woman, and I don't want to blur those lines because I think both play a very real and very important role in humankind, right? And that was the big thing was even if a woman was a lesbian, she was still a woman. And even if a man was gay, he was still a man.
Yeah.
And there was a distinct difference between the way, or there was still a definite definition of man and woman. And when they started saying, well, and I don't disagree, we can love who we love, whatever. But when they started that whole thing of we're going to start this thing, there's a lot of wheels turning, right? A lot of wheels turning in people's minds, and we cannot blur the definition of the two. And they say, oh, that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. We just want to love who we want to love. We want to marry who we want to marry, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay. So, obviously the political winds shifted. You're right. It did become this political thing. The thing kind of, the whole, gay marriage thing got through. And then, yes, at this breakneck pace, like you said, in Canada, it didn't happen overnight. In the United States, it was like the space shuttle taking off.
It was.
I mean, this thing, yeah, it was one day it was, we just want to love who we want to love and marry who we want to marry. And the next day it was like, you can be whatever you want. You can identify as a puppy, whatever. It didn't matter. You
Yeah.
know, now
And
there is no man, there is no woman. We're
yeah.
just right there.
Yeah, which is ridiculous because gender ideology completely undermines the entire rationale behind the gay rights movement because it hinged on the fact that we are men and women. Gay couples didn't come along and say, well, let us get married because one of us identifies as a man or something. You know what I mean? There was still that very strict distinction. And so that's where I see sort of the hijacking taking place because taking gender ideology seriously and all the gender stuff, it renders sexual orientation completely meaningless. That's where, to me, it just really seems like it was hijacked by, and unfortunately it seems like they proved the slippery slope right, which is what you were sort of alluding to, that 1 minute you're saying,
Exactly.
oh, we just want to love who we love, which was a very winning message. It won over a lot of people, it won over a lot of conservatives.
Absolutely did.
A kind of almost nowadays you would consider even a conservative position that says just let me live my life and leave me alone and I won't impose my will on you. Like nowadays that seems actually very, it always was quite a conservative
It
position. So
is. It is.
I
Yep.
think that that's why we got to a point where, I mean, I came out when I was 16. So that was like 2006. And yeah, I think that very many conservatives said that the way they would deal with this is to just say, yeah, you live your life. You've kind of made the case that it won't impact mine. So, okay, let's just go with this and be fine. Like I never faced too many issues in my life growing up. I went to a Catholic high school. I'm in a conservative province. But then activists sort of kept pushing too far in a very nonsensical direction. And it really it's like they proved the slippery slope right. And I hate it because I don't feel like it had to go that way, but
Right.
it did go that way. And I can admit that.
Sure. Yeah, and that's another, that's a paragraph that really stood out to me in your article was, I have been out since I was 16 years old. Trans activists have done more to damage my rights than conservatives could have
Yes.
ever dreamed.
Yes.
Over the years, conservative people were growing more and more tolerant
Yeah.
along with the rest of society. If they were going to if they were going to come after me, then they had plenty of time in the years between Canada legalizing same-sex marriage and then losing its mind over Bill C-16. So, I
Exactly.
mean, that stood out to me. Again, that was one of the things that stood out to me in that article that you wrote, because yeah, and I think and what you're saying there makes a lot of sense, because what it did was it really took that slippery slope mentality, that argument that so many conservatives had, right? Well, this is a slippery slope. How do we, you know, and a lot of times that is the argument, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a slippery slope. Let's slow down. Let's
Yep.
really look at all the things with this. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's look at how many different things are going to be affected by this and try to do it the right way, not try to do it overnight and just completely upset the apple cart, you
Yeah.
know? Um,
Exactly.
and it just makes so much sense is when you do that, like the United States did, that you just, like I said, it was one day it was, we want to love who we want to love. And the next day it was like, boom, you have to either, there is no definition of a man anymore. There is no
No.
definition of a woman anymore. There is, there's no, you can't be a woman who's attracted to women because women no longer exist. It's a social
Exactly.
construct,
Yep.
right? And it's wild. How?
Yeah. And like I said, like not only does it undermine the entire rationale for wanting rights for same-sex couples because it doesn't exist anymore, but yeah, what I said in that paragraph about how they've hurt my rights more, like just as a woman, like in Canada, because of things like Bill C-16, which protects gender identity and gender expression, and we have those protections at the provincial level as well. So technically, like you know, I wouldn't say it impacts my everyday life too much, but it does impact people I know. I don't really have the right to single sex spaces anymore or services. Or, if I saw a man in my changing room and he identified as a woman, I could get in trouble for kicking him out. I also do some investigative journalism for a website called Redux. And I have written articles and I've been in touch with a mother in BC who was dealing with this. She saw a man in the changing room. She went out to complain to the staff. And in fact, they told her that that she could get in trouble for confronting him, for kicking him out. Right. So
For
what,
even
not
expressing her concern.
even expressing her
Now she's
concern.
the offender.
Yeah. So, I mean, these people, like conservatives, after like gay marriage passed, or, even they had, especially just in the context of Canada, they had a decade to come for me if they were going to come for me and nothing ever happened. Everything was fine. And all that's happened now is I've been hurt by these ultra progressive, left-wing gender ideologues. They're the only ones who have done anything to my rights. Like I go to protests and things like that. I protest men in women's prisons, and it's always been fine. But it's always a concern that the activists could come out and be crazy and attack us, or that we might get in trouble for speaking our minds. My own city here in Calgary now, because early this year there used to be protests against drag queen story hour. I wasn't involved in
Mm-hmm.
that, but a lot of parents were involved in that, and they would show up and protest. And my city passed a bylaw that essentially said you can't protest within 100 meters of a municipal building where these things are taking place for like any protected characteristic, but really like, sex and sexual orientation and all that. But really, this is about the gender stuff. This is about the drag queens. And so they're
Sure.
actually limiting people's right to free expression and freedom of assembly. It's very strange that they're doing this, So if
Yeah.
I want to go protest at a library or something, you have to go a whole football field away, and then nobody knows what you're protesting.
Right. Right. Freedom of speech is fine as long as you speaking the language that we want you to speak. Right.
Yeah, yeah, and
And,
super far
and
away where nobody knows what you're doing, and
right.
uh,
Yeah. And I don't pretend to know a lot about what they do in Canada as far as their laws. I know I've seen
dystopian.
Trudeau and some of the stuff that he's done in the trucking industry, or to the truckers in the trucking industry, which
Yeah,
I thought was very, very troubling. But
yeah,
I'm one of those guys that I'm red, white, and blue. You see the thing over over my shoulder there. I love being an American, but I feel your pain, because so many things that you experience in Canada, the same kind of things are happening here.
hmm
And don't think that there aren't people in our own Congress here that aren't trying to do those same kind of things.
Oh yes, they are. Yeah,
Make it introduce legislation for hate speech, and make it so that that people who speak up against things like drag queen story hour or whatever. I am I'm 100% for people's right to speak and do what they want to do, and things. But when it comes to like our children and what they're subjected to in school, what they're forcibly subjected to in school, and things like that, and age appropriate things. I mean, our kids only get one round at innocence, right?
yeah,
And when they are subjected to things that I don't want them subjected to, it really, really bothers me. And I'm speaking for myself here, but I know that it bothers a lot of people, and it bothers a lot of people across the spectrum
it does. Yeah,
of political, and call it gender ideology, sexual ideology, sexual preference ideology, whatever you want to call that spectrum, because there's so many these days. I know it bothers people, and
it
the
does.
reality is this, Eva, is we do only get, or our children only get, one shot at innocence, and once that genie's out of the bottle, there's no putting it back.
hmm
And that's why I think a lot of people are very concerned, and that's why I think a lot of what you're saying needs to be listened to, and listened to very thoroughly, because these are things that you may say it's or not you, but people may say it's this, it's the social norm, we're going to go with it, this is the right thing. I'm like, no, we
No.
can't, because there's certain things that cannot be undone.
Yeah,
Talk a
especially
little
when
bit
it comes
about
to
that,
kids.
and how that's relating to kids.
Yeah, I mean the issue with kids, that's one of the biggest reasons I'm in this. That's one of the main things I write about. I do a lot of investigative pieces into what kids are being taught in schools here in Canada. That was kind of how I got my start writing under my own name, because I'm a content writer. I write all the time. I've been writing for 10 years. But under my own name, some of the first things I did was to discuss what's going on in schools, and it's crazy. And even not just schools, but the medicalization of children, putting them on puberty blockers and all that stuff. You're right; they get one shot at it, and I can't believe what's going on. Like that's and part of the reason that I never bought into the whole like trans kids thing. As a younger woman, I was more kind of progressive liberal. I kind of bought into, okay, trans women are women, but never when it came to kids, because I would have been one of those children, because I was a tomboy, because I was very gender nonconforming. If
Sure.
that was today, I would be one of those trans kids, and they would have changed the course of my life. And so, one thing that has been really, really good here in Canada actually is that the parents are actually finally realizing what's going on
Manning up to it.
and waking up. Yeah, it started with the Drag Queen Story Hour protest. I was happy to see that. That was, like I said, that wasn't connected with me and people I know in Calgary at all. Like, because I do have a little group here of activists and stuff, but that was just parents. They're realizing what's going on in the schools. Finally, we've had some pretty big protests here in Ontario. Even Calgary had one. And that's what needs to be done, because I think parents were just kind of too blasé about everything. Oh, whatever, school board elections never mattered. That's becoming a bigger issue. People are actually paying attention to who they're electing. A friend of mine in Ontario ran for the school board. Unfortunately, she didn't get it. But yeah, that's a huge thing. Like, a few weeks ago, actually, I sort of infiltrated this parent meeting with the people who were teaching this stuff in schools, gender identity, sexual orientation. They were kind of, showing them what they show. It was this thing called Out in Schools. They show these movies all about gender stuff. And
Okay.
I was really happy to see the parents that were there, maybe 8 or 9 or 10 of them, in the chat, just constantly asking, like constantly criticizing it, saying like, what's going on? What is this? What are you teaching our kids? These presenters were trying to get through this happy, fun presentation. Just, isn't this all great? And it was so great to see the parents saying, why are you teaching our kids this? And
Right.
it's very, very underhanded, because oftentimes it isn't actually part of the curriculum. They have outside organizations come in and teach these things and show these movies. And that way, when parents kind of ask, like, when they criticize it, they get sort of the runaround and get told it's not part of the curriculum, don't worry about it. But then the kids are still being taught this stuff.
Right.
So I think it's very important for parents to have a voice. I published a piece on that experience I had, and a lot of people read it and liked it. So I thought that was great, because they are the important ones, and I'm lucky enough to have a bit of a platform. People read my stuff like you. Thank you very much. And so, I just want to help however I can, especially when it comes to the kids issue.
No, and I think you're doing great work, Eva. I really do appreciate it, because I think more people in general, and I don't care whether it's a guy like me in Minnesota that's got a podcast, or a gal like you in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, who's got an incredible Substack and a great following on Twitter, or just your everyday, mom and pop at their coffee shop, on Main Street America, or Main Street Canada. People need to speak up, because these are the things that are really important. These are the issues that cause so much polarization, and they don't need to, because if we're just having the conversation, if people will just speak their mind, and oftentimes it's just about having the conversation, and let's say, let's not do this overnight. Let's really work on this for a period of time and see if it really makes sense, before we just try to completely redefine what human beings have been since the beginning of time, and do it by tomorrow, like at 3 o'clock. It's
Yes.
so. Anyways, no, I appreciate it, Eva, so much. I appreciate the work that you're doing. I appreciate your writing. I'm very grateful for you and what you're putting out there. Tell everybody on the DTH podcast. Tell everybody, where they can find you, and what they can expect if you've got anything big coming up.
Okay, well, you can find me on Twitter. It's just at Eva_Kurilova, my name. I also have a Substack. It's also just evakurilova.com. And I write for a wonderful Substack called The Distance. It's from an organization called LGB United. We're kind of just trying to put a voice out there for people, for, same-sex attracted people who don't accept this stuff. And as for any big things I have coming out, I released an article today that I'm very proud of. It's currently locked for just subscribers of The Distance. So in a week, check back in my Twitter and I'll be tweeting about that. It's a deep dive into history. It's a deep dive into how, sort of what we talked about, how like the gay rights movement got infiltrated and how this all happened. So I really appreciate you having me on and talking to me. And, you're a conservative, you're supposed to hate me, but somehow somehow you don't. So
Not at all.
it's
In
great.
fact,
No, of course not. I know.
in fact, Eva, I'm proud to call you a friend, and
Thank
I
you.
look forward to more conversations in the future. So, Eva
Thank you.
Kurilova,
So do
thank you
I.
so much for joining me on the Derate the Hate podcast. You're awesome. Keep it up, and we'll talk again.
Thank you. You too. Very happy to do it.
Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide. And of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, wilk@wilksworld.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.